and welcome to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. And today I'm utterly delighted to move across the seas for you to bring in New York's finest. It's James Campbell of Harrington Starr. James, how are you?
I'm great, Toby. How are you? I'm keeping well,
I'm
you know.
very, very good. Thank you. Very, very
Mhm.
good. I'm glad to hear you keeping well because it's relevant at the moment. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about what's happening out in New York at the moment.
So New York at the moment, it's in a tricky little zone, as is most of planet Earth, to be fair. So I can't really complain too much. But yeah, it's been very much stop start for the most part, obviously. So from a lifestyle and pandemic point of view, I suppose, obviously it all went incredibly insane at the very start because New York is essentially a petri dish for germs on a good day, never mind during a global pandemic. So that was interesting to say the least for the first few months. And then things kind of eased a bit, but obviously New York remained a petri dish, so things obviously had to be uneased again. But yeah, it's honestly it's not been as bad as it could have been, but it's obviously a bit of a tricky time across the city, across the country as a whole. Obviously, the US has been hit relatively hard overall. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I think overall people are starting to find the new normal. The working from home situation, people have gotten more used to it, people have adapted, and I think that's probably the word I think of over the last year in New York is people just adapting to how to handle everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sort of adoption has been something which is very clear. We saw some sharp contraction of the market out in America and over here as well in the hiring market, while people
Mhm.
took stock. The summer months probably took a little bit longer, I think, to come back to life in the US, and we saw a really strong last year with some stunning performances. Your top sales performance over the course of the end of last year as well, and notably within that. And you work the change in product space,
Yeah.
and we saw a sort of sharp increase in demand in that area over the back end of last year. That seems
Mhm.
to have carried on into the start of this as well. Tell us a little bit about the state of the US hiring market in the financial technology space.
So yeah, so I'll start from I guess the state of when the world decided to go on fire, and then I'll work to the current stage now. So, like you said, end of March area. I'd actually just got back from a trip in Florida, funnily enough, and then everything just went crazy. But I got back, had a bunch of open processes, doing quite well. At the start of the year, obviously, the start of the year in terms of the way it's typically structured in the cycle of recruitment is January, February is like planning out the planning for the year for hiring across the sector. Then start of February to March is like executing for Q1 hiring and getting everything figured out. So that's a really crazy busy time for us, which was coinciding with interviews and stuff like that. And then overnight off, the tap came off, people freaked out, and it was like the way I was kind of thinking about it is like people were just like panicking, and obviously business was like, where is this going to go? We have to look after cash reserves. What's going on? How are we going to grow? And everyone just freaked, which is understandable. It's unprecedented for a long time, especially in the Western world. And yeah, it went pretty bad pretty quickly. to be
Mhm.
honestly, to be blunt about it, it wasn't pretty. And then honestly, for the next 2-3 months, things were just a bit, no one knew what was going on. It was just an unprecedented time of uncertainty. And then eventually people started realizing, you know what, we're all not going to die. Industry's not going to completely collapse. And we need to start thinking about the future and how we do things. We're set up in our work from home offices. HR has the policies rolled out. Now we need to look at our growth because we still want to be a company a year from now. So within that, we have to start building again. And I'd say that was kind of the dry period for most of New York. And depending on the vertical, took different kind of stages to get back. But for me personally, I'd say about 3 months in to the pandemic itself is when I started picking back up again, where people were like, yeah, all right, James, we need to just get it together. We were half a year left. We still have goals we want to achieve as a business. Financial technology, out of all the sectors, I'd say, were those kind of two cores of the business, were actually not hit that hard in terms of like, if you look at kind of the US markets overall as like I guess as an industry or macro economy, finance and technology are probably two of the pillars of the economy that kind of kept it running over the course
Mm.
of over 6 months, because obviously retail was gone, service industry gone, hotels, all that sort of stuff gone for the most part, given the ramifications of the pandemic. But then this kind of technology and financial services market was the main areas, because it can all be done remotely. It can all be worked off home. You can still build a product from home. You can still sell a security from home, right? And that's kind of
Mm.
kept going, which is kind of what I've seen over the last 6 months of last year.
Yeah, it's been very, very robust and good to see the sort of the comeback from the New York market. We'll come on to all that a little bit more as well, and I want to sort of focus particularly on the product area, which I think has been fascinating and
Mhm.
something I've been speaking to a lot of guests about over the course of 2020 is the sort of rise in incremental importance of the product manager into the industry, and I think that's been most notable over the course of last year as well. But first and foremost, give us a little bit of background about you. You've been with us now for just over 2 years.
2 whole years, part of the furniture.
Forging your name out there in New York.
Yeah.
James Campbell, tell us the James Campbell story.
James Campbell story, a tale of misery and woe. No, I'm joking. No, James Campbell story. So I actually, which would maybe confuse some people by with the red hair, the ginger, and the incredibly thick accent. I'm actually from America originally. So I was born in New York and lived here for about 10 or 12 years, which people always find a bit disconcerting. People always think I have a fake accent, for whatever reasons I would do that. But that's a consensus. But yeah, I moved to Ireland when I was younger, did school and college and the whole shebang over there. And then so I studied communications in college, ended up doing a master's because not due to my interest in PR nor communication, but due to the fact that I didn't want to leave college because I don't want to grow up, or at the time I didn't want to grow up. Now I heavily enjoy it. But yeah, then I ended up, so spent a summer out in Chicago, and then I came back and I was looking for a job, and I had some money saved up from working, and eventually ended up starting my recruitment journey because a buddy of mine, he worked for a company called Hayes in Scotland for a year when he did a year over with his girlfriend who had to move back. So he worked for a company called Hayes, and I was like, I could probably do that. Like, it sounds like an interesting job, it sounds like a good role. And so then I started my recruitment journey with a small company called Hayes PLC. And yeah, I worked with them for about a year and 2 months recruiting for PA and secretarial and office support. Thankfully did quite well. Had some really amazing colleagues and mentors that I still talk to this day. I had such a wonderful time there. I can't really say. And it was like, I was a fresh kid just out of college. I was complete moron, for lack of a better term. I didn't know nothing about life, and I had this group of really good people that, like, aside from teaching me how to be a recruiter and be better, like, as a person, I learned a lot that year, because I was like first out of college, first real job, wearing a suit every day on a sales floor, and all of a sudden I have responsibility which I hadn't had for probably the 21 years prior to that day. So it was interesting. And then so I was in Hayes for a while, and I started thinking about New York, because I'm a citizen, and I've always had this romanticization of New York, because my parents met here, and they always told me stories about when they were younger and the beauty of the city and the fun that they had with their friends and my aunts and uncles and so on and so forth. And so I've always had this really romantic view of New York, as I'm sure a lot of people do across the world. And yeah, so I started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go work in New York. So I got in touch with a few people. A few of them introduced me to a wonderful company by the name of Harrington Starr, a leading financial technology recruitment organization that were looking to bring and build their kind of business over in New York. And obviously that worked out for me, because I was kind of a big trained recruiter from a big agency, so typically they're relatively well trained. I had the passport, which makes everything a lot easier. And yeah, I got talking. I was whisked away to London on my final interview to meet with a lovely team and the wonderful Toby Bab. And yeah, we got talking about it, and it just made sense in my head at the time. I loved everyone I spoke to. Obviously, Rob Grant, who's now been up to COO, but also who's running the New York office. Me and him spoke on the phone, and I remember, it's funny. So I was on a bus back from work, and the bus traffic in Dublin is absolutely horrible at the best of times, but this was a particularly bad day, and I had to get off the bus and take the phone call with Rob. And obviously you're a bit nervous, you're a young guy interviewing, and I had to step off and take the phone call for an hour and a half, like an hour or whatever, on the side of the road. But even with that, we just had such a great conversation. And then I met with yourself and the team, and obviously me and you have a great relationship, and we just bonded. And I was like, yeah, this is a place I want to work. Obviously I had a few things going on, but it just really seemed like, from a culture perspective, it was a good fit. And I've always been interested in capital markets and technology, so it all just seemed to come to play. And then the final seal on the deal was, we didn't sign on any line, but I agreed to take the job. And then me and you went for a beer afterwards and had a bit of a chat, and off I went back to Dublin to tell everyone. But yeah, that's kind of how I came to be now. And yeah, I guess from there I've been here for 2 years, and now I guess I'm part of the furniture, I guess you could say.
So the group rookie of the year in your first year. You're the US top biller in your second year. The sky's the limit for this year ahead, right? And it's been brilliant to see that sort of real immersion into the marketplace and understanding that sort of space, and the development has been just a joy to see. But let's go into that, because I think you have gained a significant amount of market insight into that product world in particular, which I know is your first love.
Yeah.
And I've seen product management, as I say, being one of the sources of if I look at some of the fast growth fintech companies at the moment, they are ex-product managers who are now moved into CEOs and started entrepreneurial businesses. We're seeing a huge growth in demand for CPOs, for senior product leaders, for product managers. Tell us about what's driven the sort of increased significance of the product manager in the financial markets, in particular the vendor space, over the last couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So I think, first of all, yeah, like you said, it is my first love. Product management I find so incredibly interesting. But to go back to your question, the significance I've noticed, now this could be some form of confirmation bias because I've become more focused over it over the last year or so, has been staggering. So like when I first started, product management and product managers wasn't really a term I heard an awful lot. Obviously it was always existing somewhere, but over the last year or so, it's become so much more important. And my personal belief along that is you have all these, it all goes back to technology, right? So finance is its own little semi-hub, right? But technology in its core, it was birthed in Silicon Valley by the Googles, the Twitters, the Facebooks of the world that did this incredible stuff. You know, I'm so interested in the whole history of it, but I won't bore anyone at the moment. But basically, they built out these like really big organizations around product and growth hacking and getting people invested in their product and making them so invested in their product and taking all their time and taking their attention. It's an attention economy is the word I heard a lot when I was reading about it. And I think over time, people copy success, right? People see, I know you're a big fan of the Amazon approach when it comes to stuff like that as well. People copy success because it's successful and you want to be successful too. It's, it's pretty common sense. But people started to notice that these companies that were building tech, they had such a product-centric approach, right? Like they wanted sexy technology. They wanted people who've seen the technology and like, oh, I never want to take my eyes off this screen. And over time, that filtered more into the newer technology organizations that were building fintech products. So the way I classify fintech as a whole, in terms of from the vendor say specifically, I'll take away the institutional side for the moment, is you have your B2C vendors and you have your B2B vendors, right? So B2B vendors for the most part is like your big capital markets, enterprise technology systems, like your Charles Rippers, your Calypsos, yada, yada, yada. And then B2C is, the kind of the newer age of the challenger banking and the Robin Hoods and the Stashes and the Stripes that are just these massive growth engines of technology and capital. And I think what a lot of organizations seen is they've seen these B2C companies and how big their product org was and how successful they were from a funding standpoint, from an interest standpoint, from a user standpoint. And they started thinking to themselves, why can't we mirror that approach with more of an enterprise specific technology? Because a lot of the older players in the space, the software, not to say it was old and clunky, but it was a bit older. The infrastructure was it's not outdated, but it's hard to change a winning system that's been around for 20 years. The architecture and everything, the way it's built is still in there, the source code and everything. Not that I'm a techie, but that's kind of the way I understand it. And then you have these newer firms coming in 5-10 years ago, and they have like these like red hot product people just out of college, computer science degrees, mechanical engineering degrees, mathematics degrees, like these really quantitative, like savvy people, and they started building sexy products, right? And then over the last few years, I've seen more of an adaptation. Like the newer vendors I started working with in this space that have been around for 3, 4, 5 years, their product function in comparison to the bigger giants of the industry is like, it's not even comparable. Like they'll probably have like a 20-30% breakdown in their product function versus the rest of the business. Whereas organizations that have thousands more staff have a similar size product staff, not even percentage wise, like headcount wise, which is staggering. And to no surprise, the companies that have these big product orgs are like ballooning in valuations. There's a couple of clients, I'll be hesitant to name drop anyone, but their valuation has shot up 200-300% over the course of 2-3 years. And like they have a massive product team. So I guess it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but technology as an ecosystem requires a good product. That's its core, right? A product is the core of the business, right? And if you start treating these enterprises on a more user-friendly basis, like these B2C companies do, you're going to make more money. And that's why we're all here. No one's in New York for their health is what I always say. But that's kind of my understanding. Sorry if that was a bit long-winded, but that's where I see the significance go. And I think from there, I've seen it more. And I post a lot on LinkedIn about this stuff. Like now the companies that are like old school titans of fintech, they're starting to copy the newer boys in the corner because they're doing well and they're copying success, right? So that's how the significance is growing. And I think as it goes on, product management is going to be such a massive part of the next decade of not just fintech, but of technology, of honestly probably the world, because technology rules the world. And that's kind of where I see the significance of product management at the moment, and it's only going to keep getting more and more important, in my opinion.
And I absolutely agree with you, and I don't think it's long-winded at all. I thought that was a great assessment of what's happening in that space, at the moment, and probably absolutely congruent with what we've seen over here in the UK. and that sort of growth in the in that particular vertical across the course of the year. And I think it's interesting, isn't it, when you look at those sort of spaces, the sort of the growth areas, you're looking at teams there that in some instances aren't as experienced as they need to be with the growth of those businesses, and we're looking at people who are at the early phases of copying those sort of early adopters still in terms of what they're doing. So product teams quite often haven't necessarily got the same depth in pure product experience as some other areas of tech may have. So when we're looking at that, and when people are looking at their product teams and looking to scale out their product teams, are they looking for experience? Are they looking for people who've been there and done that and got the t-shirt? Are they looking for potential? Tell us what people are looking for in their product teams right now from what you've seen.
Yeah, that's another great question, Toby. So it changes per client. Obviously, everyone's different, but there's commonalities across every search that I do that are pretty staggering, I suppose. So specifically from a knowledge standpoint, domain knowledge is typically very important, especially in financial technology and finance as a whole. Like, finance is a very, very complicated and convoluted industry. There's lots of different asset classes, lots of different things like that. So in order to build a product efficiently and manage a clientele, you need to understand why this product does what it does and how it affects the end user, right? That's the main thing. So domain knowledge is always important. And obviously that varies depending on the client. But the vast majority, say, for example, if I'm working with an equity trading systems vendor, for example, random, you need to know someone who understands the equity trade life cycle front to back and how that all works. And because it just makes sense, right? And that's, but then I guess on that point, you see a lot of former portfolio managers moving into products because they're end users. So that's one. Domain knowledge, imperative for the most part, in my eyes. And then honestly, this is a second and just as important, if not more important part, is the harder one to grasp. And I think that's where I make my money and where recruiters make their money as a whole, is that soft skill, right? That ability to talk to someone, that ability to manage a process, that ability to manage different personalities, because products as a function sits across three different teams. It's sales, marketing, technology for the most part, and it's a little hub in the middle, making sure all these people do well, essentially. And we have a strategic product that does well and makes the company money. So having that ability to, and the charisma and the gravitas to manage the different personalities, get things out on time, and just really build a good product using all the skills at hand requires an enormous amount of soft skill, an enormous amount of communication, an enormous amount of tracking and strategic thought and high level, low level thinking. And that's what I'd say are the two most important things. But again, it's very hard to quantify soft skill. You can't see soft skill on a CV. You can't say, I'm great at communicating on a CV. It's very hard. That's kind of where I guess is a middleman like myself comes into play. And then to go on to that as well, and to kind of answer your question a bit more specifically, it's very hard to quantify the value of someone who's been doing product management for 10 years and is an esteemed kind of member of that organization versus someone who's doing it for 5 years who's very, very strong as well. I personally, I'm not big into years of experience. Like I always push back on that with clients, because it's like higher competency, higher understanding, higher, this person is so intelligent that you can put them into a farm and they'll build out a tractor, like that. You know what I mean? That's the sort of stuff you have to do. You need people who understand things, just understand and have a bit of common sense and can really figure out complex problems and make them executable, right? So I think those are the key things I see against product. And I think to add on to the point with that, I remember watched one of your podcasts recently. It was with the CPO, and they were discussing how a lot of product people move into executive management. And it's because it's like that managing of different aspects of a business is so important. And again, it's hard to quantify. But if I were to kind of summarize what I just said, I'd say domain knowledge is very important. I'd say soft skill is very, very important. And to add on to that, high level and strategic thinking is very important as well. And then fourth, obviously product management is a skill set, and there is specifically, how do I build a product? What are the sprint cycles? How do I roadmap? And there is hard skills to that as well. But a lot of the time, that's far, far more teachable than someone who just knows the industry really, really well. Like I said, you see I have a few clients where their chief product officer is a former portfolio manager, because they just understand the business so well that you can teach how to build a product. But to teach 20 years or 10 years of equities trading life cycle experience is a bit more difficult over the course of 6 months, and a lot more time consuming.
Yeah, I think that's really significant, isn't it? Because that sort of area of entry for people to come into the marketplace and be able to allow that is it sort of ties in exactly with what I talk to a number of different founders about. And those successful businesses are the ones who have strong tech without question, but sometimes the strong tech isn't answering the right questions. And when you have product teams in there who can help answer specific questions that are really going to move the needle for those companies and provide real-time problems, that sort of sector knowledge, that deep sector understanding of the user standpoint, and be able to create that UX, that experience through it, becomes the real barometer for success across the industry. So I think that's absolutely fascinating within it. With that as well, good product managers suddenly find themselves in high demand, right? So when you've got an area, a market, a position which is on vogue, it often means that you're there and you're scrambling for that talent as well. So I always advise companies who I'm speaking to be able to illustrate why it's a great, why their company is a great opportunity over other places for them to look at as well. So with companies who are looking at this and watching you at the moment and saying, right, I want to attract a good product manager, what are those product managers really looking for in the right opportunity at the moment, and how do companies make themselves attractive to those particular candidates?
No, yeah, and again, good question. Again, it changes per client or per person, and it can be relatively hard to quantify. But if I were to nail down a few things, I'd say first of all, and this is, I heard like Ian mention this, and I think this is like such a common phrase, but I have to beat it in again because it's so important. Like, what's your value proposition? Like what is your company doing? Like, it's such a simple concept, but people seem to get lost on it sometimes. It's like, yeah, we're going to pay you $1 billion, and we have a great product team, take the job. And it's like, yeah, but like, what do you do? Like, what are you trying to achieve? What's your 5-year plan? That's something I hear a lot, especially from products, because a big part of product management is the roadmap and the vision of the company. So if you can't explain that properly to the person who's going to be doing that job, that's a bit concerning for someone going into that role. And that's a bit of feedback I get. I'm like, James, like, they're, great company, great people, pay well, interesting tech, but like, what do they want to do? And that's a really important thing to muster. So value proposition, vision. Product management people, generally speaking, are more technically astute. So technology as a whole, it's kind of like, to an extent, developers want to work on the most interesting tech. Product managers want to work on interesting tech. The big tech at the moment is cloud. Everything's cloud. AI, machine learning. Those are like natural language processing, or NLP. These are the core technologies that will probably run the world for the next 10 years, and that's kind of the big one. If you work on technology like that, it's exciting. But again, that ties into the vision. How are we going to continuously innovate our technology to make it the best technology on the block, and so on and so forth? And those are kind of two big cores, like vision, technology. And then this kind of changes per person, but structure is really important. This is actually a random one that I hear often. So it's not random, I suppose it's pretty consistent. Structure in an organization is very, very important, especially from a product team. Or if you're throwing someone in to create the structure, it's different because that's part of the remit. But if you're putting in a 5-year product manager to a product org that's a bit of a mess, and the development team hates the sales team, and the sales team hates the marketing team, and the marketing team hates everyone, then you're gonna be in trouble, right? So they need to find that structure. You need to convey that structure and how you do things overall. And again, that is kind of, you can't contradict that by saying this person has to come in with a structure. But I think being upfront about that from the start, is this is your remit, I want you to structure this, is very, very important. Because if that's not explained very cohesively from the start, then you're going to have a disappointed and kind of disillusioned candidate. But again, then you have candidates who are like, oh, I want to grab this and make it my own, which is great. But again, it's kind of upfront from the start. And then, like, I always hate to say it, no one's in New York for their health, right? Like, New York is a highly competitive marketplace where people are typically paid very, very well, and the ones that do well are paid very, very, very well. And it's like, you can't underpay for a good person, and that's just the reality. Like, you could sell them the world, you can do this, you can do that, you can send them to the Bahamas on a private jet, but like, if you're underpaying them for their job, which at the end of the day, you work to enjoy yourself and to get value from your job and to have a life, but you also work to get paid. That's kind of the core concept of work. If you're not paying them enough, and you challenge that, and you're only like, you're fighting a losing battle. Especially product managers, like, they're incredibly well paid. They're all super sharp, super competent. They can change your business over the course of 6 months and bring back so much revenue. Don't underpay them. Just don't get caught into a losing battle where you're underpaying 20K less than a competitor that you would have paid anyway, but you're just trying to lowball people. It happens sometimes. It's always very unfortunate. And thankfully, for the most part, most of the clients I deal with take my feedback on that and just trust me when it comes to comp. I'm not a recruiter who just sends them 40K over expectations for to make money off. Like, I'm very honest, and this is what you need to pay, and this is what's going to happen. You will hire this person for this exact amount, no matter what. You just need, like, it's such an important part of it. But yeah, I guess to summarize again, vision, structure, technology, and obviously compensation is important too. That's kind of the 4 I would say.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I've been hearing as well is the product's one of those interesting things where people do want to have that sort of input into the trajectory of the business. They want to move the needle. They want to do something which creates value for a company. And I think sometimes in those founder-led businesses, there sometimes it becomes a bit of a headbang between the sort of founder who's had the vision, had the idea, wants to own the tech, particularly tech founders, and then being able to give that up a little bit as product people come into it, to give them the sort of legs to have the autonomy to make a difference. And I think people there who need to understand that if they want to have great product managers who can do that, they need them, because they are bringing people in who can ultimately be better than them. And of course, Steve Jobs has always talked about the secret is hiring people better than them and getting out their way. And this I think is a classic example of that. If you want to build a product team, it's that story of how they're going to contribute as well, which and how they're going to be having the freedom to make an impact, which becomes really important with it too. So yeah, really, really interesting stuff there. So as we look as we come into 2021, we're doing this sort of towards the end of January already. So we're almost out of 2021 already. But as we come to the end of the first month of the year, tell us a little bit about what the forecast is. I mean, there's so many different things that are happening, and realistically, I always say this. What good is forecasting at the moment in terms of what happens, because there's so much volatility. Last year proved that. The pandemic, is likely to be around for a little bit longer as vaccines come through. Hopefully there's an outshot. That outshot should create bounce. There will be a phase where I'm looking at this, not to answer the question that I'm giving you, but I'm looking at this where people who've been held for a little while and not wanting to jump to be the first in, last out, and into new companies, get the confidence to move and want that change and want that movement. So I think we'll see some movement over the second half of the year in the marketplace. I think we will see, in both of the major countries that we're looking at, both in the UK and the US, we have prime ministers and presidents who are very, very, for very different reasons, very keen to make an impression, to bounce back from this economically, to make a bit of legacy in their administrations, to prove that Brexit was the right sort of play in the UK, to prove that replacing Trump was the right move out in the US. So there's very, very strong and invested governments who are keen to build stimulus into the marketplace. We're seeing those vaccines come, as I say, which provides a sort of outshot to create that feel good and that economic bounce back. At the same sort of stage that the general consensus, or report from Barclays today saying the general consensus was people talking about growth. So there's quite an optimistic picture of what's going to be happening over the course of 2021. No one knows exactly what that looks like and where it happens. But if you're to sit there and say, where are some of the core areas that you think you're going to be looking out for, and you see real traction in the marketplace, what's your crystal ball telling you?
Cloudy with a chance of uncertainty. No, I'm joking. What does my crystal ball tell me? So I think it's like stages of grief, right? At the very start of last year, everyone freaked out and lost their mind, and understandably so. It's unprecedented, right? And now, like I said earlier, people are just starting to accept it, and I think that's not going to go anywhere. Obviously, it was still a massive battle ahead of everyone, professionally, mentally, physically, everything, right? And that's going to take its toll. But I do think we're kind of at the end of the tunnel. Like I do, like there is light there, like as the sun shines down on my face poetically. But like there is light at the end of the tunnel. There really, really is. Over the next year, I think things are going to stay relatively consistent, unless obviously there's so many variables to consider from a macro scale. Whether it's just, you can go talk about it all day, but I think for the most part, finance technology is going to hold pretty strong across my specific industry. The markets are doing incredibly well, performing really, really well. They might have a bit of a dip over the next few days with uncertainty with the inaugurations and stuff, but the markets are holding up well, which means financial services holding up well, which means there's money being pumped in the economy. You have a new stimulus coming over here for like what was 1.9 trillion dollars, wherever they pulled that number out of, but like that's to get pumped back into the economy. Everyone's trading, like the market's probably never been busier from a volume perspective, and I could easily be wrong about that, but there's way more retail traders and stuff like that. So financial services is going to be okay. The big boys are going to keep making money off the small boys and vice versa, and that's going to keep going that way. And then technology is the future. Like that's never going to go anywhere. Like no matter what we do until Elon Musk creates a robot that takes over the world, like we're going to be really heavily invested in technology. So from my own personal perspective and a business perspective, this industry is going to be fine. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And when it becomes fine is probably not too far from now. Obviously vaccines are important, but thankfully, and it's quite selfish to say this, our industry hasn't been as heavily affected for the most part. And like anything, good companies are going to be hiring good people, and that's the way it is. Like, good companies make money, and that's a lot. That's a lot of the way. And not that not that you're a poor company because you didn't make money in the last year. You had a rough year. 'Cause that's obvious. People had a rough year regardless of how good they are. But I remember we spoke about this when this all first happened. If you have the ability to pivot your business and refocus your strategy, then never waste a good crisis, right? And that's kind of that's what we did as a business. We restructured a lot of things and we changed things, and we thought about strategy, and then now thankfully it's going well. And I think the companies that do that will still be hiring, will still be doing well. And yeah, like, I think this year for the most part is gonna be a lot easier than last year. We have a few more things to do, but like from my side, I'm busy. I've only been back. I had a few weeks off at the end of last year, and I'm crazy busy. I have lots of open roles. I have lots of clients reaching out to me and stuff. I have lots of candidates looking to move. And yeah, I think it's going to be fine. But I guess the kind of tie knot in it from a recruitment standpoint is clients are still hiring, candidates are still looking for jobs. The barriers for entry and it might have got a bit more difficult, but I mean, I don't see any massive challenges arising over the next few months, unless something following the current course, right? Unless vaccines start killing people, or unless COVID 85 comes out, and that then we're in trouble. Then I don't know, the jig is up. But I think for the most part, I think like the sector looks fine, the recruitment looks fine. There's still money being pumped in left and right. It's all going to be okay, hopefully.
Well, I'll drink to that. It sounds like it's and yeah, look, I absolutely the robustness of the market was stunning. I thought, everyone did take a pause and a breath without question.
Mhm.
March, April, May, but very quickly we saw companies that sort of recognize the opportunities and be bold with it, and that confidence sort of spread dramatically over the second half of the year. All roads lead to strength, as we can see anecdotally at the moment. So, James, it's been brilliant hearing that sort of depth and insight and everything you've been doing. I think it's really valuable, and really grateful to hear your overview of that product space. For people who are listening to this and want to find out a little bit more, who should be talking to you at the moment, and what's exciting in your world?
Everyone should talk to me. Now I'm joking. So who should be talking to me? If you are a client or a hiring manager, not just looking to hiring someone, but looking, how do I structure my organization? How do I build out a product team? Give me a call. You don't have to pay me just for talking to me. I'm a pretty approachable guy, as I've been called before. So feel free to give me a call or reach out. If you're a candidate with a few years experience, looking to get into product or looking to transition or even curious about it, reach out to me. Again, I'm a pretty approachable guy. I can be, I'm pretty reachable for a lot of the part. Obviously, sometimes things take precedent, but for the most part, I'll get back to everyone, regardless of, whether there's something there in the future or something there right now. So yeah, if you're in the product space, reach out. If you're starting a business, reach out, and you want to know how do I hire my first 3 product people, reach out. I love talking about the space, as I'm sure my thousands of words said in the last 30 minutes has been proved. I have a genuine passion for it. I speak to senior candidates and even mid-level candidates and junior candidates sometimes for an hour when I first speak to them, just talking about all this stuff. I genuinely love speaking about it, and I really find it interesting. And reach out. If it's product management, financial technology, or even if you're working in HR and TA and you're curious, how do I structure this? How much do people want to make? What do I want to do? Give me a call. I'm always here. I'm always on LinkedIn. I'm pretty visible on that. I'm sure I'll post this after myself, as I'm sure you will. I'll give emails and stuff and everything. But yeah, it's a fun time.
It is indeed. James, It's been brilliant talking to you. Thanks so much for coming on the show. We hope you've all enjoyed it, watching at home, and we'll see you soon on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. James, thanks very, very much.
Cheers, Toby. Thank you.